I had just bought a Bugatti Veyron, and I'll be honest, a Bugatti was never on my dream car list. But Matt Armstrong just crossed a line with Bugatti, and it's causing serious tension. After taking on a damaged Chiron, Matt Armstrong also picked up a faulty Bugatti Veyron of his own. When Bugatti refused to help, he went ahead anyway, fixing it in his own way and documenting everything. That decision has sparked backlash, raised questions, and pushed things further than anyone expected. So what exactly did Matt Armstrong do to Veyron, and why is it causing problems with Bugatti? Matt Armstrong recently rebuilt a completely wrecked Bugatti Chiron Per Sport without a single page of official Bugatti documentation. Before he decided to do it himself, he had initially attempted to go through the proper channels. He called the company, but they didn't return any of his calls. When they eventually got back to him, they brought strict policies and insane prices for selling their parts and offering services to customers like him. After this, Matt didn't waste any time. He decided to fix the car himself. Torque specifications were found independently. Cracked bracket material was identified and a correct fabricator was sourced. He kept hydraulic gearbox lines connected and discovered a compatible TDI starter motor by himself, and also because it cost significantly less, both money-wise and stress-wise. A few months later, he finally got the chance to buy his own Veyron. The problem was that it also came with numerous issues. While working in Florida on a crashed Chiron, Matt's tattoo artist sent a message about a repossessed Veyron. It was such an offer that as soon as the text landed, Matt had a maximum of 20 minutes to decide whether he was interested in this collector's item. For someone who loved cars as much as he did, it was a no-brainer. He committed to the idea instantly. This time, he wasn't as naive. He knew the mannerisms of Bugatti. While Bugatti cannot refuse to sell parts to a registered owner, it mandates that any parts ordered must be fitted by Bugatti at its authorized facility. This prevents owners like Matt, who create content documenting the engineering process, from doing so, as the parts are not allowed to leave the Bugatti network. Even though it was an impromptu purchase, he already had dreams of driving the Veyron in the summer. There was no way the Bugatti route was a smarter move than trusting his own hands again. Matt knew the car was hard to attain. There were only 450 of them ever made. It was so hard to even find one for sale. He says it was one of those pivotal moments in his life. He felt like opportunities had been thrown right in front of his face, and if he didn't take them, he could never have gone on to be successful in so many different directions. He felt like this was another one of those opportunities that he could not miss out on. He loved the car, and maybe the dirt cheap tag was a warning sign. But who cares? With hopes that he would be able to fix it, he immediately started talks with those repossessing the Supercar. Before his extremely faulty Veyron arrived, he had never even sat in one before, so all of this was new to him. When the car finally came in through delivery, it was time to tick and untick boxes. At the beginning, everything looked like it was in decent condition. He then attempted to start it, and that was when the problems decided to show themselves. The car started, but he quickly realized how short-lived and shaky that start was. He soon discovered that it was because the coolant was low in the tank. Since it was a new type of car, he wasn't sure where to top up the coolant yet. But on the bright side, it actually started and sounded good. Even though it failed to drive, the engine just running was a beautiful start to proceedings. It was a way better starting point than a completely dead engine. When a car is bought from a repossession company, all one gets are the keys. They rarely provide detailed information about the history of their cars. Because of this, Matt had no idea why it got repossessed or the details of the issues it had before him. So the first thing he did was put the car's registration plate into Carfax. As he waited for results, he was pessimistic about whether the car would show up on the database at all. But luckily, it did show up. Now that he had some information about the car, he found out that the original color was white, and that the color they were seeing at the time was actually a car wrap. Another thing he saw was that the car didn't even come to UK until 2018. In the database, it showed that it was made in Molsheim, France, with chassis number 34 for Dubai. The thing about cars that go to Dubai is how specially made they are. Cars that are meant for Dubai are usually made to have better all-around mechanisms, especially in the cooling department because of the heat there. The Veyron was also a left-hand drive vehicle like the ones used in Dubai, but he was accustomed to driving those. so it wasn't a problem. According to its mileage statistics, the car had a run-in in the UK where its mileage shot up dramatically up until 2023. Another interesting fact he saw was that the car was MOT'd in July 2024, which wasn't that long ago. The problems that this car had must have happened within the 9 months from its MOT. But what worried him the most was its cost of operation. He was worried if the previous owner stopped paying the car's finance because the expenditure was so much that he couldn't afford it anymore. And that was the big question. How did it end up getting repossessed? Was it a bad buy on his part? The main issues with this purchase still lay with the car's isolated start and failure to move. It sounded like it had a small misfire any time he attempted to drive it. The dashboard of the car continued to light up with the warning signs of an engine and coolant light, and it wasn't letting him gear it into neutral. Trying to gear the car into neutral or drive yielded the same results. Nothing happened, and the engine also wasn't sounding good. These weren't simply battery-related issues because he had started charging the battery ever since he got it. And on top of that, he knew that the strange leakage he found in the radiators wasn't a good sign. Matt and his team immediately opted to get the car inside a workshop and detect exactly what was going on with it. But before that, Matt decided to give the Bugatti route one last push, one final cry for help. The next day, after his Veyron had arrived, Matt Armstrong clenched his fists and decided to call Bugatti headquarters to ask for help. He had previously tried calling the company's various branches, but it seemed like none of them were bent on listening to him. A particular branch even went as far as ending the call immediately after he introduced himself. The attendant's reaction wasn't even because of his outlandish demands. They never waited to hear them as his voice and reputation preceded him in stores that dealt with automobiles and the like. Not knowing Matt Armstrong was some sort of crime. Matt Armstrong is one of the top British YouTubers who has spent years as a super-obsessed creator that specializes in fixing wrecked supercars. He specializes in buying crashed, written-off hypercars that everyone else has given up on. And with skills that put even original manufacturers like Bugatti to shame, he brings those cars back to life. Sometimes he makes them even better. Matt has fixed many supercars. He has done it all, ranging from a total Porsche GT3 RS, a Lamborghini Aventador SVJ that had been destroyed, an Aston Martin DBX that had been completely submerged underwater, a Ferrari 812 Superfast that he rebuilt from nothing and then gifted his dad. In one instance, he even took a completely damaged Lamborghini Revuelto, one of the most electronically complex hypercars, and rebuilt it into a brand new machine. With a reputation like that, it's no surprise that his channel has over 6 million subscribers. Because of this massive fan base that believe Matt to be a god when it comes to the world of cars, executives in the industry have been getting more and more jealous. Some revered him and tried to bring him on board their team. Some silently hated him and chose to look away. Like the latter, Bugatti's leadership saw him as a direct threat and never missed a chance to put him down. Matt, who was only enthusiastic about engines and the sound exhaust pipes made, never caught on to this hate. So when Matt tried to call him on that morning, what he met was complete and utter resistance. At the beginning, the representative listened to him make his requests and talk about how this could benefit both of them and how much the car meant to him, without saying a word. And then they both went silent. Matt started wondering what he had said wrong and tried to clarify, but the representative cut his sentences short. They allegedly called Matt's approach absurd and arrogant, and also spoke about how much damage Matt was causing Bugatti's image, labeling their cars as fragile and simultaneously giving ammunition to the competition by showing them the secrets of their design. They didn't stop there. As Matt tried to speak, they shunned him again and continued. Finally, after they calmed down, they tried to strike Matt a deal in order to fix his car. Either Matt received help from the company in return for a restrictive collaboration on their terms, or they would go their separate ways, and Bugatti would withhold all support. Some of the terms would see Matt relinquish control of his creative direction and give up significant revenue on content proceedings. A truly absurd deal, as Matt wasn't even a businessman in practice. He was a lover of cars above all. It didn't take more than a few sentences before he ended the call. This damaged the already fragile relationship, and things escalated. Bugatti took to making it clear through channels that they would not be supporting Matt's efforts. When asked about it in industry circles, they publicly challenged some of Matt's claims about sourcing parts. The situation became tense, turning the whole thing into a very heated back and forth witnessed by the general public. And it was as messy as it was dramatic. Without shame, they outrightly refused to sell him certain parts. Not because the parts didn't exist, not because they were unavailable, but simply because Bugatti decided that Matt was not worthy of accessing components needed to repair a car he legally owned. But they didn't stop there. They made their position clear. Bugatti went further, making statement for the world to see. They said that in their cars there were so many electrical wires, piping, oil piping, water piping, and fuel lines that connect various components, and any attempt at fixing would require expertise beyond what independent mechanics possessed. But the twist was simple. They also wouldn't allow just anyone to do this. They considered the parts as proprietary Bugatti property and aimed to prohibit private individuals like Matt from working on them without authorization. Matt Armstrong didn't think like the corporate representatives, and it was by some fortune that certain restrictions didn't fully materialize. But his luck could only get him so far. The company later went ahead to make access to spare parts that could be sold to private individuals more difficult. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience either. They made sure parts that would normally cost modest amounts became significantly more expensive. Needless to say, the incident sparked an enormous debate online and offline about the right to repair in the supercar world. There were thousands of comments, millions of views, and people genuinely divided on whose side to take. The situation was heated. Many feared it may run Matt to the ground, but it didn't. And as heated as that incident was, it had a certain clarity to it. Bugatti had said a clear no, but Matt pushed forward anyway. He took his pride, picked up his tools, called a few friends, and decided to do it himself. After the Bugatti confrontation, Matt and his friends began working on the Veyron. They immediately identified 3 problems: no gears, an engine misfire, and a coolant light. Their workshop session started by plugging in the diagnostic tool to see if it would give them any more specific information and fault codes regarding what they already knew. As they were doing this, they had their fingers crossed, hoping the damage on the car would be as little as possible. The diagnostic scanner immediately cut their hopes short after it displayed up to 30 fault codes. They then decided to clear these codes and try to see what signals returned in order to limit errors on the scan. In the best-case scenario, they restart the scan and everything works perfectly. But after the restart, it still wasn't looking good. The transmission and the engine light were still flashing warning signs. The engine, for some reason, also started to sound significantly worse than before. In disbelief, he scanned again. And on this 3rd try, he now found a major problem. There was a misfire issue. In cylinder 8, there was no signal. It was such a rare car, and as a result, they were uncertain. They couldn't decide if the car needed service, a change of spark plugs, bad coils, or if it was a problem with the ECU. Even if they were getting somewhere as to why it was misfiring, they still had no idea why it wouldn't go into gear. They were meant to hear a transmission pump. What they heard instead was a weird buzzing sound when they opened the car door. Matt concluded that this was because the vehicle had low transmission fluid. The pump kept going and going and going until eventually just stopped and gave up. Then suddenly, after they thought it was over for the pump, another fault appeared on the diagnostic screen. It showed that the pump had exceeded the switch on time. The team of YouTube engineers were now faced with a few decisions to make. They either had to fill it with fluid and pray that it would work, or the pump was broken, and they were going to have to source one elsewhere since Bugatti wasn't cooperating with them. There was also a 3rd option, which involved them finding it off a parts car. They had already identified that the pump was faulty, so the next step was to determine whether it worked at all or only intermittently. To test this, they attempted to activate it remotely. When they did, the pump came on but wouldn't stay running, which meant it couldn't build the pressure needed to shift into gear. To fix the issue, they knew they had to bring in expertise. So they started looking into whether anyone had dealt with the same problem before, hoping to find the right person to call who could help sort it out. And they eventually did. Nobody really had enough information or experience on fixing Bugattis independently. But surprisingly, someone from the team still managed to bring in a person who had a significant amount of knowledge on these niche engines. It was a stopgap method to at least close the distance and time involved with reaching their goal of getting the car to finally move. He said many things and also instructed them on some new procedures. He also said the story behind both of the Bugattis Matt Armstrong had worked on was unusual and that the Bugatti network was limiting resources and there was no straightforward answer, but he would try his best to instruct them. Putting all that aside, they decided to focus more on gathering information on the most pressing problem, which was the shifting into gear issue. But to do any of that, to access the engine, they needed to get the engine cover off the car. And none of them knew how to do that. After hours of deliberating and trying failed methods, they decided to watch a video on YouTube. And surprisingly, a tutorial popped up instructing them on how to get it off. They removed the seal around the back, which allowed them to access the engine. They were now face-to-face staring at the raw engine when something unexpected happened. While Matt and the new engineer were looking at the engine to inspect for damage, a third member went in to try starting the car again. Instead of making the usual sound a W16 engine makes, it began making a horrible wailing noise. Matt and the engineer got startled at first, then eventually laughed at how absurd the damage on the engine clearly was. The next thing the engineers decided to do was to check for other faults they might have missed before going into the main misfiring problem. In a way, they had hoped these little problems they were looking for were all connected to the misfiring and gearbox issue, so that they could just solve multiple problems at once. The next step was to start removing all of the under trays. As they started disconnecting these trays, the more they realized how much care this car really needed. It was in such bad shape because of the British roads and high mileage. Underneath all the trays, everything was looking a little rusty. They saw the solenoids that were linked to the pressure pump, but they were not leaking. With nothing being obvious there, they lowered the car so they could try another exercise with the gearbox. As the car was on the ground, Matt opened the box and tried turning a cable in order to rotate the wheels forward and finally put the car in neutral. It worked. Since this worked, it meant that the gearbox was mechanically seized. That was good news. But not being mechanically seized and still unable to utilize gears was still an anomaly. As they were deliberating, they also realized they hadn't been hearing the secondary air pump's power up. Somehow earlier, they missed the absence of the sound the secondary air pumps make when powering up. Right at that moment, they felt like they were at another dead end. They looked into the diagnostics to see if they could get a glimmer of hope, but nothing came. As they came across this problem, they knew it was concerning, but quickly dismissed it and moved on to trying to find out why there was a misfire. For this part of the project, Matt decided to call Ricky from RE Performance about it. When the call went through, Ricky sounded expectant and jovial, like he had been anticipating something like this. They exchanged pleasantries and immediately got into business. Ricky Elder is a former Audi UK development engineer who founded RE Performance, a specialized supercar workshop based in Swindon, UK. Established in 2015, he specialized in repairing, maintaining, and tuning high-performance cars, particularly Audi R8S, Lamborghini V10S, and other supercars. He had also heard about Matt's conflict with Bugatti, but was still intentional about helping him because they shared something in common concerning this car. On the call, he admitted to Matt Armstrong that he also wanted that particular car that was in Matt's possession. He admitted to knowing the previous owner of the car, and then he talked about how the owner of the car literally drove the car hard, then had the car repossessed by the finance company when he couldn't keep up with payments. They also discussed racing driver Mark McCann, who just bought a Bugatti Veyron of his own. He mentioned how if it were the same owner whom he knew who chose to let the car go into repossession, then it was highly possible he drove it hard enough to damage the gearbox. Ricky also told Matt about Mark McCann's plan to source a new gearbox from Spain. After he got up to speed, Ricky had Dips, a collaborator of Matt's, plug his computer into the car while he remotely logged onto it to see if he could get the secondary air pump to start up using a diagnostic tool. While trying this, he noticed something. The gearbox's pressure relay was running. This meant that the reason for all the previous error messages was that the car thought it was functioning properly when it wasn't, an electrical fault from the system. He also noticed more issues with relays. The car had multiple faulty relays across its systems, including the gearbox. This meant one thing in the grand scheme of things: faulty fuses. All it took was that call to wrap things up quickly. All sense of uncertainty had gone. They immediately went to the fuse box to check for faults. Ricky originally thought it was going to be a major fuse or relay compromise,